Welcome back to DWeb Decoded, a podcast by Filecoin Foundation that explores the intersection of blockchain and the data economy. I'm your host, Aaron Stanley, and today we're continuing with a special mini-series exploring decentralized media. We're joined by Arikia Millikan, who is a 20-year media veteran and founder of CRTL+X, which is a super exciting project that's building a blockchain-based content licensing and distribution platform for media companies and content creators. So we're going to be learning all about this today. Arikia, it's great to have you on the show.
Thanks, Aaron. It's so great to be here. I'm really excited to talk about CRTL+X today.
Awesome. So, to get started, why don't you just give us the TLDR on what CRTL+X is, and then tell us a bit more about yourself and your background and how you arrived at this point in becoming a founder.
Yeah, absolutely. So CRTL+X is a blockchain-based content licensing system that enables creators to declare ownership over their content. And we're focusing on text-based assets in this scenario. So focusing on journalistic content, but in a way where we're not just talking about the news. We're talking about lots of different forms of journalism and really enabling journalists to maintain their archives. And so to pull back all of the assets that are scattered across various platforms in the Web 2 world and utilize blockchain technology to preserve their content and really establish the ownership aspects of it.
Got it. And then maybe tell us a bit more just about yourself and in this journey that you've been on over the years. You've worked in media for a long time. You've kind of become intimate with some of these problems you're trying to solve. Maybe just tell us a bit about your journey toward becoming a founder of this particular company.
It's been a long path and a winding one. I started off my career in journalism after studying engineering, and communicating science and technology has always been really important to me. And so I started experiencing some of the problems that I'm now solving with CRTL+X pretty early in my career. And I think the first time was working for Wired magazine, where I was an editor back in 2010, and experiencing how content could be ephemeral sometimes, and depending on decisions from the company or, sometimes arbitrary, like doing a redesign, for example, could just knock out swaths of content at once. And so I experienced as a freelance journalist and an editor and someone who has worked with a good deal of community journalism projects, what it looks like when hundreds or even thousands of articles go offline and are inaccessible, or maybe someone goes in and manipulates the database and deconstructs the information, pulling away the creator byline from the actual content in order to do something else with it that was aside from its intended use. And so I had the idea for CRTL+X back in 2015. Pretty much as soon as I read the Satoshi paper, I was like, this is going to be useful for journalism too. And I started pitching it around. I was living in New York City at the time, and people told me I was 10 years too early. So it's been 10 years, and I think we're right on time for this technology to really begin to exist in a meaningful way.
I love that. Yeah. Well, hey, now is the time, right? It's been 10 years, and I think we've got hopefully the tech's at the point where it's mature enough, and I think people are familiar enough with some of these problems, right? With 2015, we still haven't had that major disruption of quote unquote mainstream media yet. Social media was still kind of this novelty, right? It wasn't really this super disruptive thing, and we obviously didn't have AI and LLMs and all this kind of stuff back then either. So. But on this podcast recently, we've been exploring kind of this idea of just decentralized media and Web3 solutions for media from a variety of different angles. But I would love for you to maybe just articulate what are some of the core problems, the core set of problems that you see with media right now that Web3 can potentially, or decentralized media infrastructure can potentially help solve. And then we can dive in a bit more into just how you're trying to tackle these problems with CRTL+X.
So other than the business model problem and the complete financial collapse of
pretty big problems. Yeah.
Yeah. Aside from that, If you ask pretty much any journalist to show you their body of work, their content archives, they can't do it, because unless someone has a subscription to every single platform where that content was originally published, assuming that the content's even still there on the platform, it's impossible. And so even journalists can't access their own body of work. So as we move into this next phase of media, I don't even know what to call it. It's like a media circus that's happening now, where misinformation is rampant, propaganda is flying around. It's going to be more important than ever for journalists to be able to prove that they've done the reporting that they've done throughout the extent of their career, and that they're qualified to continue to do it in the future, and that they can be trustworthy. Because I think we've seen like a complete bottoming out of trust in media institutions. And I've always believed, especially because I got my start working with bloggers. So independent journalists that were using publishing technologies without management, essentially, without a publication telling them, like, this is what you can write. But I've always believed that journalists themselves and the trust that they can establish as human beings is really important to the whole equation. And so that's one of the things that I'm trying to pull the technology back to with Control+X, and saying it's fine for publications to do what they do, however they want to do it, but they're individuals that are at the basis of everything that's happening in the editorial world. And we really have to acknowledge the individual's contributions. And there's no need for them to be locked into one publishing platform at a time, or to publish to one place at a time. Why not publish the same article to 100 different places if 100 different publications want that content? But right now, with the current systems, even the newer tech platforms that have been built for journalists that claim that that the journalists are able to own their content, if you look through the terms and service, they're prohibited from monetizing along multiple pathways. And I think that's
so doesn't do much good to own the content if you can't monetize it, right? Or if you can't, right? Exactly. Kind of defeats the purpose, right?
I think so.
So, well, that kind of leads into my next question, which is that there's been, this idea of Web3, solutions and kind of for media and for content creators and ownership and all this kind of stuff. This is not really a new thing, right? This has been around for a while. There's been a lot of different projects, some more high profile than others over the years, that have kind of made a splash trying to sort of reinvent media along these lines, or provide some sort of solution to some of these problems that we've been talking about. And I know you spent quite a bit of time like studying these and kind of trying to learn from some of these. And I think a lot of these folks are all kind of like directionally accurate, right? But at the same time, I feel like maybe we kind of, as a Web3 community, we maybe kind of, drink our own Kool-Aid a bit too much, with thinking like, ooh, the creator economy, we're just going to we can sell our own NFTs to people and finance our work that way or whatever. A lot of these solutions that are just, they weren't actual solutions. They were just kind of justifications for like why people should be paying a lot of money for NFTs. It was just kind of, none of these things like really panned out, right? And maybe they will at some point, but as of now, they haven't. But maybe talk a bit about just how you've maybe like kind of learned vicariously from some of the other solutions that have been prototyped that are, have been kind of trying to directionally do the same thing that you're doing. And, how have you kind of learned from that and tried to iterate on that?
Yeah, it's been a long research phase, and I love research, so that's okay. But I think when you look at some of the strongest contenders who, I was cheering from the sidelines for, like, oh, they're going to do it because then I won't have to. I can just write because that's what I really want to do with my life. But I think part of the problems had to do with the state of the blockchain industry and its maturity or lack thereof. And, just in the past 2 years, the accessibility of Web3 technologies has come down significantly so that mass adoption is now possible. The user interface, like the experiences, have become something that people who aren't engineers can actually understand and engage with in a way that feels safe. And I think it was really challenging for some of the noble efforts that really started getting people thinking about the importance of bringing blockchain into the journalism world, because they had a lot of technological hurdles to deal with that you just don't have to deal with today, because there are services that kind of like roll everything up for you and offboard the technicality for the end user specifically. And I think the other major thing is the kind of like crypto economic side has smoothed out a bit, and arguably so, because there's still a good deal of pumping and dumping going on. But there were some idealistic visions that I think had solid foundations, which weren't matched by the reality of user behavior. And now that we have those experiments to draw from, we can really start to iterate in ways where we're involving the user from the ground level. And, if creating like a DAO is part of it, if having a token is part of it, let's explore. But from my perspective and what I'm trying to build with Control+X, it's like, let's give journalists something that's useful from day one, that actually solves the problems that they have versus solving the problems of investors wanting to make more money, which we can solve those too, but like later.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good point. I think it's a good point. This is why I like, one of the things I like what you're doing is that you're really trying to make this focused on like, okay, let's try to create a platform that kind of solves some of these problems, but is also something that like the end user or like the content creator, the journalist would actually like want to use. Like, how does it solve like their problems? Some of these other solutions I feel like have been maybe more focused on like, oh, we're going to try to like fight fake news, or we're going to try to do, this other thing, or we're going to try to, but the end, like the journalist himself isn't maybe like interested in, like, they just want to get paid for their content. They're not necessarily interested in like fighting fake news or whatever. Like, they're just trying to create something and get paid for it. So I feel like some of this stuff kind of started off with like you said, like idealistic visions of like how this should maybe operate without maybe really taking into account like how like the exact incentives of journalists and content creators themselves. But maybe let's talk a bit about Control+X specifically, and would love for you to just kind of like walk through like the platform and what are some of the native features that you are building as a part of this? Like, what are some of the core value propositions that you're optimizing for?
Right. So I'm actually trying to avoid using the term platform as much as possible, because I think
sorry to rain on your parade.
It's a pretty tricky thing to do. And I still am catching myself when I'm going through the materials, having to like edit out the term platform and find ways to talk around it, because platforms are part of the problem that Control+X is trying to solve for. Because, there once was this promise of the open web, and now there's a sea of walled gardens in the open web. And how I like to think of Control+X is that it's a protocol-based system, and it really functions as the like sewer system underneath all of the walled gardens, where content, like journalistic content, can flow freely between buyers and sellers. And so if the buyer is a walled garden and they want to have a really strict subscription model and advertisers to do whatever they want to do with their publication, with their brand, okay, but journalists will always need to be able to access other journalists' content. It's different from the music industry, right? Where you don't necessarily need to hear all of the other songs that are like in the genre of the music that you're creating for. But if you're a journalist writing about something very specific, you need to know what's going on, like what other people are writing about. And so what Control+X does is makes that exchange feasible in a way where we are bringing micropayments into the equation for the first time. And part of that is due to our choice to build on Solana. first and foremost. And we're exploring cross-chain options, and that's always going to be something that's in the vision. But Solana has really made microtransactions feasible for the first time. And I just did like a cost comparison earlier today and came up with this example where, like, if we were to develop on Ethereum versus Solana, it would be like prohibitive transaction fees. So it'd be like going to the coffee shop and buying a $5 coffee and then having to pay $20 in processing fees just to have your $5 coffee. But with Solana, it's negligible. So if someone wants to read an article, 10 cents, what is that worth? Like, and I think we really have to like pull people back slowly from this idea that content should be free, because the people who decided that were not journalists.
Right. Yes, so, definitely we're not journalists. Yes.
Yeah, but it's a tricky behavioral challenge because it's ingrained now. People are accustomed to getting things for free, but we're moving into the state where the content that's there for free is not necessarily journalism. And the content that's behind the walled garden paywalls is quality journalism that maybe people should have access to. But maybe, I mean, we've seen definitively, like, there is subscription fatigue right now. It's capping off at around 20% of people willing to pay for subscriptions. So we have to find another way.
Yeah, well, I know for things like, you know, for platforms like Substack or like Beehive or these kind of like creator economy, like self-publishing type platforms that offer subscription services as part of as a feature of that. I mean, they tell their users pretty routinely that, like, look, if you convert from, you know, if you switch to a paid model versus like just a free model, like you'll convert maybe like 2 to 3% of your reader base to paid. Like, that's the rate. So if you have, you know, 2,000 subscribers, that would be, you know, how many, like maybe like 20 to 40 people that would actually pay, right? Which is, yeah, like that's not very much, right? Like, well, and the other thing too is, like, if you're a consumer, like you're kind of like, well, like, I just want to read this one article. I don't want to, like, you know, spend $10 a month and have to, this gets billed recurringly for eternity till I cancel my credit card, you know, like, I just want to read this one thing. I don't want to like give over my credit card information and all this kind of stuff and you know, have to worry about all that. So I think there is kind of this subscription. It's almost like the pain of like unsubscribing, you know, after I read the one article that I want to read is like I'm not going to even, you know, sign up to begin with. Right. So I think the subscription fatigue is a real thing. So maybe talk a bit about, I mean, I love the micropayments thing because I've always viewed this as really kind of like the missing piece or like the holy grail of how to make something like this actually work. Maybe just talk a bit about like how that specific feature works. And then I would love for you to maybe talk a bit about some of the other features that you're really excited about on this platform and just how these things all kind of fit together.
Yeah, absolutely. And just going back to the platform competitors that you just mentioned, like, aside from having only 2 to 3% of the people convert to paid, it's only 2 to 3% of the entire revenue that's going to the platform that's actually making its way back to the creators. And like around 1% of the population of creators, at least with Substack, that is actually making a living wage from that.
1%. Oh, wow.
So what Control+X does is we are going all the way back to the concept of contracts, which a lot of people don't read, but I love to read contracts. And I think I've always been kind of a weirdo in the journalistic space where I'm going through with a fine-tooth comb and just figuring out, like, what does all of this mean? And that is the foundation of Control+X, where we're actually creating a technological bridge between the ownership rights that exist inherently between a writer and the content that they produce, which in the past, publications have created contracts to gain access to. But there's been a misconception in the industry because when you hear writers, especially freelance journalists, talk about how they're interacting with publications, they'll often say like, I sold this article to this company, I sold it to that one. But that's not actually what's happening. What's happening is that they are selling a limited license of the work that they own forever to that company. And for that limited amount of time, it usually comes along with a period of exclusivity where the companies are the only ones that are permitted to do something with that work for that time. And that exclusivity period reverts after a certain amount of time, but by then, most journalists have forgotten that it even existed in the contract. They don't, and especially with like the news cycles, and when you see something that's like really newsworthy and viral peaks after 3 days, then what does it matter about the long tail of the content? So journalists...
Yeah, it's not going to be relevant after, it's like, oh, you can use the content however you want after 7 days or 14 days. But it's like, well, it might be just totally irrelevant by that point, right? It has no value.
Yeah, exactly. And it's important to question irrelevant to whom, because when advertising was the primary business model for journalists, it was the advertisers that cared. How many clicks were they going to get within what window? And so that's where like the exclusivity really came in, because the publications wanted their advertisers to be happy with that peak of content. And then the long tail, they didn't care about. Put it out for free because that's just a lure to get people into the other content that the advertisers are going to benefit from. But now we don't live in that world anymore. Things have changed so drastically, and the media technology has been so slow to catch up with it. It was already bad in the first place, right? Like, let's not kid ourselves. Publications have always gotten bottom of the barrel technology. And that's what we're dealing with now, is like the crumbling of that into a point of disuse. But so what Control-X does is it establishes in the blockchain that contractual ownership between an author and their content, so that lives forever and establishes, this is what I wrote at this point in time on this publication originally, and that can never change. So we're doing it in a way also which protects the privacy of the writers, because maybe they don't want everyone to have access to everything forever. Like, do I want someone reading my blog from 2006? No, but do I want to make sure that it's preserved so that I can have it, and so that someone who wants it for maybe research purposes, or if I want to train an AI agent based on my historical writing, maybe like that needs to be online in a digital form somewhere. And do I want to trust a platform with that private content? Or do I want to make sure that I am the owner of it and it will stay that way until I decide differently?
Yeah, I love that. So having this gating and these access permissioning rights, et cetera, built in natively into the protocol and just into that contract, right? So, so I have, as the creator, I have the rights to basically, like, I can keep it private. I can license it to whom I want to license it to. It's not, if I want to just available to myself or just people that I authorize, that's possible. Having that functionality kind of built in natively seems like it will be, very important. So, and then talk a bit about how does decentralized data storage play in this whole stack? Like, how does storing these articles and these contents in a decentralized fashion that's redundant and immutable, and where the creator themselves actually has the ownership of that article, of that file? Talk a bit about how why that's necessary for this protocol, and then how you're kind of going about implementing that.
Yeah, so in the journalism industry, censorship has always been a problem, and hopefully won't get worse. But TBD, like, let's see. And decentralized storage is a way that really begins to address the problems with censorship, because in the past, and you hear stories of journalists who will write something that some like oligarch or government finds unfavorable, and someone will just walk into their headquarters and physically take all of their computers out and then like the publication's offline. And with decentralized storage, we're moving into a phase where if one node goes down, then it doesn't impact the integrity of the information that's stored there. And aside from that, according to just some preliminary calculations, I think in terms of energy saving, there are a lot of possibilities there as well, because the media industry, as it exists currently in Web 2, is incredibly energy consumptive. Like I read that if the internet was a country, it would be the 6th largest consumer of electricity. And I think with decentralized storage, and I mean, you're the expert, so correct me if I'm wrong, we can start to move toward systems where we're storing things where there's room with computers that already exist. So we don't need to like, slash and burn a whole new sector of the rainforest just to like pop up a server farm to do one specific thing for one company.
Yeah, it's definitely a resource optimization question, right? If we have all this hardware and it's just a question of getting it online and using it and optimizing it, that's definitely one of the benefits of these types of systems for sure. And then maybe talk a bit about the AI side of things. We touched on this earlier, but I think one of the things that I find super interesting about this is like, hey, if I'm a journalist, I'm a creator, I want to be able to license my content to not just publishers who want, media sites that want to publish the content, but also to like AI models that might be interested in training or AI agents, this types of thing. I mean, this is a very interesting potential revenue source, right? That has been, it was just science fiction until recently. So maybe talk a bit about how are you kind of seeing this play out? How do you see a protocol like what you're building really playing into playing into this, like how can journalists leverage this for their own benefit?
I think I've done a 180 over the last year on my stance on AI, because in the beginning, when all the buzz was about OpenAI and everything was about the theft of journalistic content to train these models, journalists were kind of in this like recoil position. Like we've already been taken from so much. Now here's this new wave of robbers that are just coming along to like put the nails in our coffins. Like does the world want journalists to actually like exist, or do we want to just have like 100% state sponsored propaganda to read? So I think after exploring some of quite a bit of the options of like decentralized AI companies and the areas where AI and blockchain overlap and begin to work together, then this concept sort of extended organically, where Control-X, because of its system managing text-based assets, we use text-based assets to interact with AI primarily. Like all kinds of different assets, of course, but the material for how different AI agents are trained and interact, and what AI companies will need to continue to develop their LLMs, because there's this point in time, there's all the content that they already have that they got, which like, oh, well, if they stole it, the media industry did such a bad job building its technology that like, it's sort of like leaving the front door to your house open and then like complaining when someone walks in and steals all your shit. But so now we're moving
that's a good way to put it, honestly. Like they haven't really done the best job of gatekeeping some of this stuff, right? And now they're complaining that people are just coming and taking it, and it's like, well, what do you expect, right?
Yeah, absolutely. But so what Control-X is doing is building a technological system where we're going to make it real easy for AI companies to purchase exactly what they need and to get it in formats that are actually easier for them to work with than if they had to build a bunch of scrapers to go in and like harvest the content some other way. Because personally, if it was a consent-based system where an AI company that had values aligned with me wanted to do something in particular based on writing that I had produced. And they asked me and offered to pay for it, or maybe I would tell them the price. Then, okay, like we have an agreement. But technologically right now, there are few options. And I know that there are quite a few companies popping up in like the AI defense area, or it's just like more protective. Like you can't take my content, and if you do, I'll sue you. But how about like you can have my content if you negotiate with me on a level playing field?
Yeah, the AI defense stuff seems very much like, it's like, okay, we're just going to build up bigger walls around the current system kind of thing where, okay, maybe that's in short term, that's maybe optimal, but is that really like a viable long-term solution here? Not entirely sure. Well, just to wrap up here, tell us a bit about just like your roadmap for the rest of the year and like going into 2026. I know you're still in kind of like building, like fundraising mode. Like what should we expect to see out of Control+X here over the coming months?
Yeah, so it's a really exciting time, and I'm so just fortunate to have the opportunity to make this my entire life's work, because for a long time I was bootstrapping the company doing AI prompt engineering to pay for everything else. And so now we're moving into the phase where we're actually building, and that's going great. We're going to test the platform with see, I did it again. We're gonna test the Control+X system with our own publication, because Control+X is a journalistic operation first and foremost, and then start to fold in other journalists that we know and trust. I mean, the network is pretty sprawling, and I think there's already been so much positive attention coming in around what we're doing that I want to build the structures to enable participation in a way where as soon as we're ready for people to begin using Control+X and monetizing their content and protecting their archives, that they'll begin to be able to do that. And so we'll have like a sign-up process soon. And then, like one of the challenges is definitely going to be account like access control, because there are a lot of people out there who say that they're journalists and maybe
right.
would like other people to believe that they are, but they're not actually like doing journalistic work. But anyway, the way that we're designing the system, we're bringing back the role of the curator in the whole process, and sort of creating a system where like we'll have the first marketplace that's available. Like Control+X will set the tone for like, this is what's possible. This is the type of content that you can exchange here. But in the future, maybe there will be hundreds of other marketplaces that are governed by other groups of people that want to interact with specific types of content. So the options are limitless. We're trying to build the infrastructure at the core really strong so that we can grow out and address all types of situations that involve writing and rights. And we're looking for support in every way.
Awesome. Well, great. Well, thank you, Arikia, so much for coming on the show to tell us all about this. This is super interesting, and I love your story, and I love the vision, and I love what you've done so far. Maybe just tell us quickly, how can folks find you if they want to learn more or support you in some way?
Yeah, so our website is CRTL+X.world. And that's the best place to find information about Control+X. You can subscribe to our newsletter, Glitching Out there, and get on our mailing list so that you can have first access to the tech as it rolls out. We are on Twitter, LinkedIn. I'm at Arikia pretty much everywhere. So you can find me and reach out. Yeah, get in touch.
Amazing. Well, thanks so much, Arikia, for your time, and the best of luck here over the coming year. And thanks everyone for watching, and we'll see you next time on DWeb Decoded.
Thank you so much, Aaron.